The silence in Westminster Cathedral was deafening. Not even the whispered prayers of 10,000 mourners could mask the sound of a nation's heart breaking. Princess Catherine stood motionless beside Prince Alexander, their hands intertwined like lifelines in a storm. The golden morning light filtered through ancient stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor where soon they would walk their separate paths forever. This wasn't just any goodbye. This was the farewell that would reshape a kingdom, divide a family, and test the very foundations of love against duty. What happened in those final moments would be whispered about for generations, but the truth behind their tears remained known only to them. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Buckingham Palace like a shroud, as if nature herself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Princess Catherine stood at the towering windows of her private chambers, watching the early crowd gather beyond the palace gates. Even at dawn, hundreds of people had already assembled, clutching flowers, photographs, and handmade signs. Their faces bore the same expression of disbelief that had haunted the nation for weeks since the announcement. Catherine pressed her palm against the cool glass, her breath fogging the window. In just 6 hours, she would walk through those palace doors for the last time as a member of the royal family. The thought sent a familiar ache through her chest, the same pain that had kept her awake for 37 consecutive nights. Behind her, the room buzzed with quiet activity. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, carefully folded the last of Catherine's personal belongings into leather trunks that would follow her to her new life. Each item told a story. The silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother. The worn copy of poetry that Alexander had given her on their first anniversary. The sapphire earrings she had worn on their wedding day, now destined for a jewelry box in a modest cottage in the countryside. Your Highness, Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. Even she, who had served the royal family for 23 years, seemed unable to find her usual professional composure. The car will arrive at 11:30. Catherine nodded without turning from the window. 11:30. The time that would mark the end of everything she had known for the past 12 years. The time when duty and love would finally force their ultimate choice. The door opened softly, and Catherine felt rather than heard Alexander's presence. After 15 years together, she could recognize his footsteps, his breathing, even the way he moved through a room. She had memorized every detail about him during their years of happiness, never imagining she would need these memories to last a lifetime. "The children are asking for you," Alexander said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had aged a decade in recent months. "They're in the garden." Catherine finally turned from the window. Alexander stood in the doorway, still wearing his formal morning dress from the emergency parliament session that had lasted until 4 in the morning. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His tie sat slightly askew, his hair bore the marks of anxious fingers, and his eyes held a depth of sorrow that made Catherine's heart clench. "How much do they understand?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Emma keeps asking why you're leaving us. Thomas just holds on to that stuffed lion you gave him and won't speak to anyone." Alexander's voice cracked slightly. "They're 7 and 9, Catherine. How do you explain to children that sometimes love isn't enough?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. How indeed do you explain that the woman they called mother, the woman who had sung them lullabies and kissed their scraped knees and read them bedtime stories, was being forced to choose between them and her conscience? How do you tell children that sometimes the adults they trust to protect them are powerless against forces larger than any individual heart? Catherine walked to her dressing table and picked up a small wooden box. Inside lay a collection of treasures that might seem insignificant to others, but represented the most precious moments of her life. A ticket stub from the concert where Alexander first told her he loved her. A pressed flower from their honeymoon in Scotland. A drawing Emma had made of their family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with the best family ever scrawled in purple crayon. "I need to see them before the ceremony," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. Alexander stepped closer, and, for a moment, the distance that had grown between them over the past months seemed to disappear. "Catherine, there's still time. We could find another way. The council might reconsider if we presented a united front." She looked up at him, seeing the desperate hope in his eyes, the same hope that had kept them both fighting long after the battle seemed lost. "You know that's not true, Alex. We've exhausted every option. The Constitution is clear, and Parliament has spoken. I cannot remain a member of this family while maintaining my position on the refugee crisis. They see my humanitarian work as a political statement that compromises the Crown's neutrality. Then, abandon the work, Alexander said, though they both knew he was grasping at impossible solutions. Choose us. Catherine stood and faced the man she loved more than life itself. If I abandon those refugees, if I turn my back on the thousands of families who have nothing but hope, what kind of person does that make me? What kind of mother would I be to Emma and Thomas? How could I teach them about compassion and justice if I chose comfort over conscience? The silence stretched between them, filled with years of shared dreams now crumbling to dust. Alexander had always known this about Catherine. It was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her. Her unwavering moral compass, her inability to ignore suffering, her fierce protection of the vulnerable. Now that same strength of character was tearing their family apart. A soft knock interrupted their moment. "Your Highnesses," came Margaret's voice from beyond the door. "The Prime Minister has arrived early. He's requesting a private audience before the ceremony." Catherine and Alexander exchanged glances. Prime Minister Harrison had been the driving force behind the ultimatum that had brought them to this moment. His party's stance on immigration had put them on a collision course with Catherine's humanitarian efforts, and his threat to call for a constitutional crisis if she continued her work had forced the royal family's hand. "Tell him we'll meet him in the blue drawing room in 10 minutes, Alexander replied, his voice taking on the formal tone he used for official business. As Margaret's footsteps receded, Catherine moved to the wardrobe where her final royal outfit hung waiting. The deep navy dress with its military-inspired cut had been chosen specifically for today. It was elegant yet somber, appropriate for both a farewell and a new beginning. The matching hat with its small veil would hide her tears from the cameras that would document every second of her departure. "I dreamed about this dress," Catherine said softly, running her fingers along the fabric. "Not this exact dress, but something like it. I was 10 years old, watching your parents' wedding on television with my grandmother. She told me that someday I might marry a prince and wear beautiful gowns and live in a palace. I thought it sounded like a fairy tale." "It was a fairy tale," Alexander replied, moving to stand behind her. "We had 12 beautiful years. And now every fairy tale must end." Catherine turned to face him one last time in the privacy of their shared space. "Promise me something, Alex. Promise me you'll tell Emma and Thomas that I didn't choose to leave them. Promise me you'll help them understand that sometimes adults have to make impossible choices, but that doesn't mean the love disappears." Alexander reached for her hands, holding them as if he could keep her there through sheer will. "Promise me something in return. Promise me that when you're living in that cottage in Devon, when you're working with your refugees and building your new life, you'll remember that you were loved. Completely, utterly, and without reservation. Promise me you'll remember that you were worth fighting for, even when the fight was lost." The tears Catherine had held back for weeks finally broke free, streaming down her cheeks as she nodded. Outside, the crowd continued to grow, their voices rising in a gentle hum of support and sorrow. The entire nation seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to witness the end of a love story that had captured their hearts, and the beginning of a new chapter none of them had wanted to see written. Margaret appeared in the doorway again, her own eyes red-rimmed with emotion. "Your Highnesses, it's time." Catherine took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary, her home, her safe haven for over a decade. Then, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked toward the door that would lead her away from everything she had ever known. Alexander followed, and together they made their way through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, past portraits of generations of royals who had faced their own impossible choices, toward a future neither of them had ever imagined. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the halls, a steady rhythm that seemed to count down the minutes until their world would change forever. In 6 hours, Catherine would no longer be a princess. In 6 hours, their children would have to learn to live without the woman who had raised them. In 6 hours, a nation would say goodbye to the royal they had taken into their hearts. But first, there was the Prime Minister to face, the children to hold, and a ceremony to endure. First, there was the hardest goodbye any of them had ever had to say. The Blue Drawing Room had witnessed countless moments of British history, from treaty signings to state dinners. But the tension that filled it this morning felt heavier than anything the ornate walls had previously contained. Prime Minister Harrison stood near the fireplace, his gray hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his expression carefully neutral. He had requested this final meeting, though everyone present understood it was more of a formality than a genuine attempt at resolution. Catherine entered first, her posture regal despite the circumstances, followed closely by Alexander. The Prime Minister bowed slightly, a gesture that felt hollow given his role in forcing this separation. "Your Highnesses," Harrison began, his voice carrying the practiced tone of a career politician. "I want you to understand that this outcome brings me no pleasure. However, the constitutional monarchy depends upon the neutrality of the royal family in matters of political controversy." Catherine remained silent, but Alexander stepped forward. "Prime Minister, my wife's humanitarian work transcends politics. Providing aid to refugees, especially children, should not be considered a partisan issue." Harrison's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your Highness, Princess Catherine's public statements calling our immigration policies inhumane and her direct contradiction of government policy at international forums constitute clear political intervention. The monarchy cannot survive if its members become partisan figures. Children are dying, Mr. Harrison." Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but steady. "Children are separated from their families, held in conditions that violate basic human dignity. If speaking against such treatment makes me political, then I accept that label." The Prime Minister pulled a leather folder from his briefcase and placed it on the mahogany table between them. "The agreement is final, Your Highness. Your voluntary renunciation of royal titles and privileges in exchange for the government's commitment to not pursue constitutional changes that would further restrict royal activities. It's the best outcome for all parties." Alexander's jaw clenched. The best outcome would be a government that doesn't force impossible choices between family and conscience. "The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to political realities," Harrison replied. "Personal desires, however admirable, cannot supersede institutional stability." Catherine looked at the folder containing the documents that would legally sever her from the family she had married into, the titles she had carried, the life she had built. Her signature would make official what had been decided in private meetings between politicians and palace advisors, with little input from the people most affected. "The children," she said quietly. "What provisions have been made for my continued relationship with Emma and Thomas?" Harrison's expression softened slightly, perhaps the first genuine emotion he had shown. "You will retain full parental rights. Custody arrangements will be private family matters, not government concerns. Your departure from official royal duties doesn't affect your role as their mother." It was a small comfort, but Catherine knew the reality would be more complicated. How do you maintain a normal relationship with your children when they live in a palace and you live in exile? How do you attend their school plays and soccer games when your presence draws media attention and security concerns? A soft knock interrupted the tense conversation. "Your Majesties," came the voice of Robert, the children's tutor. "The young ones are ready in the garden." Catherine's heart began racing. She had been dreading and anticipating this moment equally. How do you say goodbye to children who don't fully understand why you're leaving? How do you be strong for them when your own heart is shattering? "Prime Minister," Alexander said firmly, "if you'll excuse us, we have more important matters to attend to." Harrison nodded and gathered his papers. "The ceremony begins at 2 o'clock. The cars will arrive at 1:30. He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Your Highness, the nation will miss you." After he left, Catherine and Alexander stood in silence for several moments. Through the tall windows, they could see the palace gardens where Emma and Thomas were waiting. The children had been told this was a special day, that Mama Catherine was starting a new job that required her to live somewhere else for a while. At 7 and 9 years old, they couldn't comprehend the permanence of this change. "They're so young," Catherine whispered, watching Emma chase butterflies near the rose garden while Thomas sat on a bench reading a book. "They shouldn't have to experience this kind of loss." Alexander placed his hand on her shoulder. "Children are stronger than we think. They'll adapt. We all will." Together, they walked through the palace corridors toward the garden. The staff they passed offered small smiles and respectful nods, many wiping away tears when they thought no one was looking. Catherine had been beloved by the household staff, known for her kindness, her genuine interest in their families, and her informal manner that made everyone feel valued. The garden doors opened to reveal a scene of heartbreaking normalcy. Emma, in a yellow sundress with grass stains on the knees, ran toward them with arms outstretched. Thomas, more reserved like his father, marked his place in his book and approached with careful steps. "Mama Catherine." Emma launched herself into Catherine's arms with the complete trust of a child who had never questioned her place in their family. "Robert said you're going on an adventure. Can we come too?" Catherine held Emma close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the outdoors that always seemed to cling to her clothes. This is a special adventure that I have to take by myself, sweetheart. But I'll tell you all about it when I visit. Thomas reached them, his serious brown eyes studying Catherine's face with an intensity that reminded her painfully of Alexander. Are you sad about your adventure, Mama Catherine? You look like you might cry. Catherine knelt down to meet Thomas at eye level, pulling Emma close to her side. Sometimes adults have to do things that make them sad but are still the right thing to do. It's like when you have to apologize to someone even though it's hard, or when you share your toys even though you want to keep them all for yourself. Emma's face scrunched in concentration. But why can't you do the right thing and stay with us? The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. How do you explain complex political situations to a 7-year-old? How do you make a child understand that sometimes love isn't enough to keep families together? Do you remember the story I told you about the princess who had to choose between staying in her beautiful castle or helping the people in her kingdom? Catherine asked softly. Both children nodded. It had been one of their favorite bedtime stories, a tale Catherine had created about a princess who discovered that her comfortable life in the palace meant ignoring the suffering of her subjects. Well, sometimes real life is like that story. I found a way to help children who don't have safe homes or enough food, but it means I can't live in the palace anymore. Thomas processed this information with the seriousness he applied to everything. So you're like the princess in the story. You're choosing to help people even though it's hard. That's right, my brave boy. Emma was less philosophical. But I don't want you to help other children. I want you to stay and help us. Catherine felt tears threatening again. Oh, sweetheart, I will always help you. Being someone's mama isn't about living in the same house. It's about loving them no matter what. And I will love you both every single day for the rest of my life, whether I'm here in this garden or far away. Alexander, who had been quietly watching the exchange, knelt down beside them. Remember how I had to go on that long trip to Australia last year? I was gone for 2 weeks, but did I stop being your papa while I was away? No, Emma replied, though her voice was small and uncertain. And did I stop loving you while I was gone? No, it's going to be like that with Mama Catherine. She'll be living somewhere else and doing important work, but she'll still be your mama, and she'll still love you exactly the same amount. Thomas, ever the problem solver, had been thinking. Can we call you on the telephone? Like when Papa calls from his trips? Every single day if you want to, Catherine promised. And I'll come visit you, and maybe sometimes you can come visit me in my new home. For the next hour, they sat in the garden together, the children gradually relaxing as the conversation shifted to more normal topics. Emma showed Catherine a caterpillar she had found, and Thomas read aloud from his book about knights and dragons. These ordinary moments felt precious beyond measure, each laugh and smile treasured as memories to sustain the difficult days ahead. Margaret appeared at the garden entrance, her presence a gentle reminder that time was running short. Your Highnesses, the styling team has arrived. 1 hour until the cars are ready. Catherine looked at the children, memorizing their faces in the dappled sunlight. Emma's wild curls escaping from her ribbon, Thomas's concentrated expression as he carefully closed his book. These images would have to last until she could see them again. I need to go get ready now, she told them gently. But I want you both to remember something very important. Can you do that for me? Both children nodded solemnly. When you miss me, look up at the stars. Wherever I am, I'll be looking at the same stars and thinking of you. The stars will be like our special connection that nobody can ever break. Emma threw her arms around Catherine's neck. I'll look at the stars every night. Thomas hugged her next, whispering in her ear, I'll take care of Emma and Papa while you're gone. Catherine's composure finally cracked. Tears flowed freely as she held both children close, Alexander's arms encircling all of them in a family embrace that would be their last for a very long time. I love you, she whispered to each of them. I love you so much that my heart might burst from holding all that love inside. As she walked back toward the palace, Catherine turned for one last look at the garden where she had spent countless happy hours with the children. Emma and Thomas stood hand in hand, waving, their faces brave but confused. Alexander remained with them, his own struggle visible in every line of his body. In 1 hour, Catherine would begin the final phase of her departure. The styling team would help her into the navy dress, arrange her hair beneath the small hat, apply makeup to hide the evidence of her tears. In 1 hour, she would transform from a woman saying goodbye to her family into a public figure managing a constitutional crisis with dignity and grace. But, for now, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was losing. For now, she let herself grieve for the life that could have been, if only the world had been a little kinder, a little more understanding, a little more willing to let love and duty coexist. The afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, marking time until the moment that would change everything forever. The final hour passed in a blur of controlled chaos and forced normalcy. Catherine sat in her dressing room while the styling team worked around her with professional efficiency, their usual chatter replaced by respectful silence. Hair was arranged, makeup applied, jewelry selected, and reconsidered. Each decision felt monumental, as if the sapphire earrings versus the pearl studs could somehow alter the course of history. Margaret hovered nearby, occasionally offering quiet suggestions or fielding phone calls from palace officials coordinating the day's events. The media presence outside had swollen throughout the morning, with news crews from around the world positioning themselves for the best view of Catherine's departure. What had begun as a private family crisis had become an international news event. The BBC is requesting a brief statement, Margaret reported after taking another call. Just a few words as you leave. Catherine met her own eyes in the mirror, hardly recognizing the composed woman staring back at her. The navy dress fit perfectly, its military-inspired lines lending her an air of strength she didn't feel. The small hat with its wisp of veiling would provide a barrier between her private grief and the public's hungry gaze. No statement, she decided. Some moments are too sacred for words. Through the window, she could see the crowd that had gathered throughout the day. Thousands of people stood behind the palace gates, many holding signs of support. "We love you, Catherine," read one banner stretched between two poles. "A true princess of the people," declared another. The outpouring of public affection was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. These were the people she would no longer serve in an official capacity, the subjects who had embraced her as one of their own. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alexander entered, now dressed in his formal military uniform complete with ceremonial sword and decorations. He looked every inch the prince he had been born to be, but his eyes betrayed the cost of maintaining such composure. "The cars have arrived," he announced quietly. "Are you ready?" Catherine stood and smoothed her dress one final time. "I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this, but I'm prepared to face it." Alexander offered his arm, and together they walked through the palace corridors one last time. The route to the main entrance felt longer than usual, each step echoing through halls that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies, both joyous and sorrowful. Portrait of long-dead monarchs seemed to watch their progress with painted eyes that held understanding of duty's heavy price. The household staff had lined the corridor, a gesture of respect that brought fresh tears to Catherine's eyes. These people had become her extended family over the years, sharing in the daily rhythms of palace life that the public never saw. Mrs. Henderson from the kitchen, who always remembered Catherine's preference for Earl Grey tea. James, the young footman who had started the same week Catherine had arrived as a new bride. Sarah from housekeeping, who had helped decorate the nursery when they had hoped for more children. Each face told a story of shared moments, private jokes, small kindnesses that had woven Catherine into the fabric of their community. Now they were saying goodbye to someone who had treated them not as servants but as valued members of an extended household. "Thank you," Catherine whispered as she passed, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "Thank you for everything." At the main entrance, the official farewell party had assembled. The Queen Mother, Catherine's own family who had driven up from Cornwall that morning, and various palace officials who would oversee the transition. Emma and Thomas stood with Alexander's parents, both children now dressed in their finest clothes, their faces showing the strain of a day they couldn't fully comprehend. Catherine knelt before the Queen Mother, Alexander's grandmother who had become a source of wisdom and support during her years in the royal family. The elderly woman's usually stern expression had softened with genuine affection. "My dear girl," the Queen Mother said, her voice carrying the weight of 8 decades of royal experience. "You have conducted yourself with remarkable grace during these difficult months. History will remember your courage." "Your Majesty has been so kind to me," Catherine replied. "I hope you'll understand that I couldn't make any other choice." "I understand perfectly. There have been moments in my own life when duty demanded sacrifices that seemed unbearable at the time." The Queen Mother placed a gentle hand on Catherine's cheek. "But you're not losing a family, child. You're simply changing your relationship with it." Catherine's parents stood nearby, their faces reflecting their own struggle to support their daughter while mourning the end of a dream they had barely dared to believe. Her father, a retired teacher from a small Cornish village, had never quite adjusted to having a daughter in the royal family. Her mother had embraced the role of a royal in-law with enthusiasm, treasuring every garden party and charity gala. "We're proud of you, love," her father said simply. "We raised you to stand up for what's right, and that's what you're doing." Her mother's eyes were red with tears, but her voice was steady. "The cottage is ready for you. I've stocked the pantry and put fresh flowers in every room. It will feel like home soon enough." The cottage in Devon had been purchased quietly several months ago, when it became clear that this day was inevitable. It was a modest place by royal standards, a stone farmhouse with a garden where Catherine could grow vegetables and flowers with her own hands. The thought of that simple life both terrified and thrilled her. Emma and Thomas approached with careful steps, their formal clothes making them seem older and more serious than their years warranted. Emma clutched a small wrapped package, while Thomas carried an envelope sealed with wax in the old-fashioned manner he had learned from his tutors. "We made you presents," Emma announced, offering her gift with ceremony. "So you won't forget us in your new house." Catherine unwrapped the small package to find a bracelet made of colorful beads, the kind of craft project children create with complete concentration and pride. Each bead had been carefully selected, and Catherine could imagine Emma sorting through possibilities, choosing colors that would remind Catherine of happy times. "I'll wear this every day," Catherine promised, fastening the bracelet around her wrist where it looked charmingly out of place against her elegant outfit. Thomas presented his envelope with the seriousness he brought to important occasions. Inside, Catherine found a hand-drawn map showing the route from Devon back to London, complete with landmarks and estimated travel times calculated in a child's careful handwriting. "So you can find your way back to us," Thomas explained. "I looked it up in the atlas and calculated that it's 212 miles. The car should take about 4 hours if there's no traffic." Catherine pulled both children close, holding them as if she could transfer some of her strength to them through sheer force of will. "I will treasure these gifts always. And, Thomas, your calculations are exactly right. 4 hours isn't very far at all." The palace doors opened, and the sound of the waiting crowd rushed in like a wave. Thousands of voices calling Catherine's name, the clicking of cameras, the hum of news helicopters overhead. The private moment was ending, and the public spectacle was about to begin. Alexander took Catherine's hand as they prepared to face the crowd together one last time. His grip was firm and warm, an anchor in the storm of emotion and media attention. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "I want you to know that these 12 years have been the best of my life. You made me a better man, a better father, a better prince. That will never change." Catherine squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the connection they had built over years of partnership. "We created something beautiful together, Alex. 2 incredible children, countless happy memories, and proof that love can exist even in the fishbowl of royal life. No one can take that away from us." Margaret appeared at Catherine's elbow with a final coordination. "Your Highness, the car will take you directly to the cathedral for the renunciation ceremony. After that, the second car will escort you to Devon. Is there anything else you need?" Catherine looked around the entrance hall one last time, taking in the marble columns, the crystal chandeliers, the portraits of Alexander's ancestors who had called this place home. In a few minutes, she would walk through these doors and never return as a member of the family that had welcomed her with such warmth 12 years ago. "I'm ready," she said, though her heart was breaking with each word. The doors opened wider, and the sound of the crowd intensified. Camera flashes began immediately, creating a strobe effect that felt surreal and overwhelming. Catherine lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and prepared to face the world with the dignity that had defined her years of royal service. But first, one last embrace with Alexander, witnessed by thousands but felt only by 2 hearts that had loved completely and lost through no fault of their own. In that moment, before the public duty and private grief had to be carefully balanced for the cameras, they were simply a man and woman saying goodbye to the life they had built together. Then, Catherine stepped into the afternoon sunlight, and the final chapter of her royal story began. The cathedral bells began tolling as Catherine's motorcade wound through London's ancient streets, each peal marking another moment closer to the ceremony that would legally end her royal life. Crowds lined the route, people of all ages holding flowers and signs, many openly weeping as her car passed. The outpouring of public support was overwhelming and deeply moving, a testament to the connection she had forged with the British people during her years of service. Catherine sat in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, Alexander beside her, both lost in their own thoughts as familiar landmarks passed by the windows. They drove past the hospital where she had visited sick children just last week, the community center where she had launched her literacy program, the school where she had read stories to wide-eyed pupils who called her Princess Kate, with gap-toothed grins. Each location held memories of the work that had brought them to this moment. The refugee camps she had visited against government advice. The passionate speeches she had delivered at international conferences, calling for compassion and humanity in immigration policy. The late-night meetings with aid organizations that had gradually transformed from royal patronage into active advocacy. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine. Starting the humanitarian work, I mean. If you had stayed focused on traditional royal duties, we wouldn't be here. Catherine considered the question that had haunted her own thoughts during sleepless nights. I regret that it led to this moment. I regret the pain we're all experiencing. But I could never regret trying to help children who had nowhere else to turn. If I had stayed silent while they suffered, I wouldn't be the woman you fell in love with. Alexander nodded, understanding even as his heart broke a little more. I know. It's one of the reasons I've always admired you. Your conscience has never been negotiable. The motorcade turned onto the street leading to Westminster Cathedral, and Catherine could see the massive crowd that had gathered despite the short notice. The ceremony had been organized quickly, with minimal publicity, but word had spread through social media and news reports. Thousands of people had taken time from their daily lives to witness this historic moment. Inside the cathedral, the scene was both majestic and solemn. Sunlight streamed through the magnificent stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floors that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the altar, his expression grave but compassionate. He had known Catherine since her engagement to Alexander and had watched her grow into her royal role with wisdom and grace. The congregation was smaller than usual for a royal ceremony, consisting mainly of family members, government officials, and representatives from the charitable organizations Catherine had supported. Notably absent were many of the European royals who typically attended such events, a diplomatic necessity given the political nature of Catherine's departure. Prime Minister Harrison sat in the front row, his presence a reminder of the governmental pressure that had made this ceremony necessary. Beside him sat members of his cabinet, their expressions carefully neutral as they prepared to witness the consequences of their ultimatum. Catherine's parents sat with Emma and Thomas, the children wide-eyed at the cathedral's grandeur but clearly confused by the solemnity of the adults around them. Emma's small hand clutched her grandmother's, while Thomas sat with the careful posture he had been taught for formal occasions, though his eyes kept searching for Catherine and Alexander. As Catherine and Alexander walked down the aisle together, the congregation rose in a rustle of formal clothing and whispered prayers. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space, each step taking them closer to the moment that would change their lives forever. Catherine kept her eyes focused ahead, knowing that looking at the familiar faces in the pews would undermine her carefully maintained composure. The Archbishop greeted them with words of comfort and understanding. Your Royal Highnesses, we gather today not in celebration but in recognition of a decision made in conscience and carried out with dignity. Princess Catherine, your years of service to the British people have been marked by compassion, dedication, and unwavering commitment to those in need. The ceremony itself was brief, but deeply symbolic. Catherine read from a prepared statement, her voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of the moment. I, Catherine Elizabeth, do hereby renounce all titles, privileges, and responsibilities associated with my membership in the royal family. This decision, made after careful consideration and with deep regret for any pain it may cause, reflects my unwavering commitment to the humanitarian principles that guide my conscience. I leave with gratitude for the honor of serving the British people and with continued love for the family that welcomed me with such warmth. The legal documents were signed with ceremonial pens, each signature witnessed and recorded. With each stroke of ink, another tie to her royal life was formally severed. The sapphire engagement ring that had belonged to Alexander's grandmother was removed and placed in a velvet box, though the simple gold wedding band remained on her finger. Their marriage would continue, but her official role as his royal consort had ended. Alexander's face was a study in controlled emotion as he watched his wife transform from Princess Catherine into simply Catherine, a private citizen whose future lay outside the palace walls. When the archbishop pronounced the renunciation complete, Alexander stepped forward and took her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about their commitment to each other despite the changed circumstances. The service is concluded, the archbishop announced. May God bless you both as you begin this new chapter of your lives. The congregation remained standing as Catherine and Alexander processed back down the aisle, no longer as two royals but as a husband and wife facing an uncertain future. The organ played softly, a hymn about journeys and new beginnings that seemed chosen for its message of hope despite difficult circumstances. Outside the cathedral, the crowd had grown even larger. When Catherine appeared at the top of the steps, a cheer went up that echoed off the surrounding buildings. "We love you, Catherine," voices called out. "Thank you for your service," others shouted. The support was overwhelming and deeply touching, a reminder that titles and formal positions mattered less than the connections forged through genuine care and service. Catherine paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the sea of faces. These were her people, the citizens she had served for 12 years, the individuals whose lives she had touched through her charitable work. For a moment, she forgot about protocol and ceremony, raising her hand in acknowledgement of their support. "Thank you," she called out, her voice carrying surprisingly well in the cathedral square. "Thank you for everything." The crowd's response was immediate and emotional. Flowers were thrown, applause thundered across the square, and more than a few people could be seen wiping tears from their eyes. Catherine had expected to leave the royal family quietly, but the public had turned her departure into something resembling a celebration of her service rather than a farewell marked by shame or scandal. Alexander stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back in a gesture of support that the cameras captured from every angle. For these few minutes on the cathedral steps, they were still together, still presenting a united front against the challenges that had driven them to this point. Emma and Thomas appeared at Catherine's side, having broken free from their grandparents' supervision to join the adults at this crucial moment. Emma tucked herself under Catherine's arm, while Thomas stood straight and serious, somehow understanding that this was a moment that required his best behavior. "Are you still our mama?" Emma asked, her voice small but audible in the relative quiet as the crowd strained to hear. Catherine knelt down, heedless of her formal dress, and pulled both children close. "I will always be your mama. Always and forever, no matter what." The image of Catherine embracing the children on the cathedral steps while Alexander stood protectively behind them became the defining photograph of the day, appearing on front pages around the world. It captured both the personal cost of political pressures and the enduring strength of family bonds that transcend titles and ceremonies. But the moment couldn't last forever. Security personnel were growing nervous about the exposed position, and the schedule demanded that Catherine's departure proceed as planned. Margaret appeared at her elbow with a gentle reminder that the car was waiting. Catherine stood and smoothed her dress, preparing for the final phase of her journey. The next car would take her not back to Buckingham Palace, but directly to Devon, to the cottage that would be her new home. Alexander and the children would return to the palace, to a life that would continue without her daily presence. The goodbyes on the cathedral steps were necessarily brief, but intensely emotional. Catherine kissed each child, whispering promises to call that evening and visit soon. She embraced Alexander with the passion of a woman who wasn't sure when she would hold him again. "This isn't the end," Alexander murmured in her ear. "We'll find a way to make it work. The children need you, and I need you. I need you all too," Catherine whispered back. "More than I need anything else in the world." Then, she was walking toward the second car, her back straight and her head held high, every step taking her farther from the life she had known and closer to an uncertain future. The crowd continued to cheer and call out their support, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance as Catherine focused on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. At the car door, she turned for one last look at the cathedral where she had been married 12 years earlier, where Emma and Thomas had been christened, where she had participated in countless ceremonies marking the rhythm of royal life. The building stood unchanged, eternal, and imposing, a symbol of traditions that would continue long after individual participants had moved on. Alexander, Emma, and Thomas stood at the top of the cathedral steps, their figures small against the massive stone facade, but their importance to Catherine immeasurable. She raised her hand in a final wave, storing the image in her memory alongside all the other precious moments they had shared. Then, she stepped into the car, and the door closed behind her with the finality of a chapter ending. As the motorcade pulled away from Westminster Cathedral, Catherine pressed her palm against the window in a gesture that mirrored her morning stance at the palace, watching the crowd and the cathedral grow smaller until they disappeared entirely. The drive to Devon would take 4 hours, just as Thomas had calculated. 4 hours to process 12 years of memories, to grieve for what was ending, and to begin imagining what might come next. 4 hours to transform from a princess into a private citizen, from a public figure into a woman starting over. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across London streets as Catherine's new life officially began. The Devon countryside unfolded like a watercolor painting outside Catherine's car window, all rolling green hills and ancient stone walls that had marked property boundaries for centuries. As they drove deeper into the rural landscape, the weight of London and all its associated pressures seemed to lift gradually from Catherine's shoulders. Here, there were no crowds waiting with cameras, no protocol officers managing every moment, no reminders of the life she had just left behind. The cottage came into view as they rounded a bend in the narrow lane, exactly as Catherine remembered from her previous visits during the house-hunting process. Rose Cottage stood at the end of a gravel drive, its honey-colored stone walls covered with climbing roses that would bloom magnificently in the spring. A traditional thatched roof crowned the building, giving it the fairy tale appearance that had first captured Catherine's heart. It was everything Buckingham Palace was not: modest, private, and entirely her own. Her mother had been true to her word. The garden showed signs of recent attention, with fresh plantings around the front door and window boxes filled with winter pansies that would provide color during the darker months ahead. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth and comfort after the emotional exhaustion of the day. Catherine thanked her security detail, men who had protected her for years and would now transition to providing more distant surveillance. The intensive protection she had known as a royal was ending, replaced by a more discreet arrangement that would allow her the privacy she craved while ensuring her safety during the adjustment period. The cottage door opened before she could reach for the handle, revealing her mother's warm smile and her father's sturdy embrace. They had driven down earlier in the week to prepare the house, stocking the pantry, arranging furniture, and adding personal touches that would help the cottage feel like home from the very beginning. "Welcome home, love," her mother said simply, and Catherine felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. The interior of the cottage was exactly what Catherine needed: cozy without being cramped, elegant without being formal. Her mother had arranged photographs throughout the rooms, images of Catherine and Alexander, pictures of Emma and Thomas, family snapshots that would keep her loved ones close even when they were physically distant. Fresh flowers filled every room, their fragrance mixing with the scent of the wood fire to create an atmosphere of comfort and renewal. "The telephone is connected," her father reported with the practical focus that had defined his approach to life. "I've tested the international lines, and you should be able to reach the children without any difficulty. There's a computer set up in the study for your correspondence, and the local post office knows to expect packages from London." Catherine toured her new home slowly, running her fingers along surfaces that were now hers to touch without permission, opening windows that she could leave open as long as she wished, examining bookshelves that she could fill with whatever volumes caught her interest. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The master bedroom was particularly lovely, with windows overlooking the back garden where apple trees stood ready to bloom in spring. Her mother had placed Catherine's wedding photograph on the dresser alongside the bracelet Emma had given her that morning, creating a small shrine to the family that remained precious even as their daily arrangements had changed. "The villagers have been asking about you," her mother reported as they sat down to tea in the cottage kitchen. "Mrs. Patterson from the post office wanted to know if you might be interested in joining the church flower committee. The local primary school head teacher mentioned they could use volunteer readers. Everyone seems excited to have you as a neighbor rather than a distant royal figure." The thought of ordinary community involvement was both appealing and daunting. For 12 years, Catherine's interactions with the public had been carefully managed and highly publicized. The idea of simply being a village resident who happened to have some useful skills was revolutionary. "I'd like that," Catherine decided. "I'd like to be useful in normal ways." As evening approached, Catherine's parents prepared to drive back to Cornwall, leaving her alone in the cottage for the first time. The silence after their departure was profound, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock and the settling sounds of an old house adjusting to the temperature changes of nightfall. Catherine had been alone many times during her royal life, but this solitude felt different. There were no staff members in adjacent rooms, no security personnel stationed outside her door, no schedule of appointments waiting for the morning. For the first time in 12 years, her time was entirely her own. She walked through the cottage again, this time more slowly, beginning the process of making it truly hers. In the study, she found the computer her father had mentioned, along with a stack of letters that had been forwarded from Buckingham Palace. Messages of support from around the world, invitations to speak at conferences, requests for interviews, and job offers from various humanitarian organizations. The phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock, as Catherine had hoped it would. Emma's voice bubbled through the connection with the resilience of childhood and the comfort of routine. "Mama Catherine, we're in our pajamas, and Papa said we could call before bedtime stories. Thomas wants to know if your new house has a library like the palace." Catherine smiled, her first genuine smile of the day. "It has a lovely study with lots of bookshelves, but not as many books as the palace library. Maybe you and Thomas could help me choose some new books when you come to visit." "When will that be?" Thomas's voice joined the conversation as he picked up the extension in his room. Catherine's throat tightened with emotion. "Very soon, I hope. I need to get settled first, and Papa needs to arrange things with his schedule. But definitely soon." They talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things. Emma's art project at school, Thomas's progress with piano lessons, the new foal that had been born at the royal stables. Normal family conversation that helped bridge the physical distance between them and reassured Catherine that her relationship with the children could continue despite the changed circumstances. Alexander's voice was warm but tired when he took the phone. "How are you managing? Is the cottage comfortable?" "It's perfect," Catherine assured him. "Quiet and peaceful and entirely different from anything I've known in the past 12 years. How are the children really doing?" "Better than I expected." Emma asked why you couldn't just do your important work and live at home like Papa does his important work. "I'm still trying to figure out how to answer that question." Catherine laughed softly. Trust Emma to cut straight to the heart of the matter. Maybe someday we'll have a better answer for her. Maybe we will. After the phone call ended, Catherine sat in the cottage's front parlor, watching the fire burn down to glowing embers. Outside, the Devon countryside was utterly quiet, a stark contrast to the constant hum of London traffic she had grown accustomed to at the palace. The silence was peaceful rather than lonely, filled with possibilities rather than emptiness. She thought about the day's events, from the morning's tearful goodbye through the cathedral ceremony to this evening's gentle arrival at her new home. 12 years of royal life had ended, but something else was beginning. She had no official title, no ceremonial duties, no rigid schedule dictating her days. Instead, she had freedom, choice, and the opportunity to define her own purpose. The letters on the study desk represented various paths forward. Speaking engagements that would allow her to continue advocating for refugee rights. Consulting positions with international aid organizations. Teaching opportunities at universities interested in her unique perspective on humanitarian issues. The future was uncertain, but full of potential. Catherine picked up Emma's beaded bracelet from the side table, fastening it around her wrist where it caught the firelight. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of building a new life. But tonight, she simply sat in her own home, in her own chair, making her own choices about how to spend her evening. The clock chimed 10 o'clock, and Catherine realized she could go to bed whenever she chose, wake up whenever she felt rested, and fill her days with activities that mattered to her personally rather than serving institutional needs. The freedom was remarkable and slightly overwhelming. Before heading upstairs, she stepped outside into the cottage garden, looking up at the clear Devon sky scattered with more stars than were ever visible in London. Somewhere to the north, Emma and Thomas might be looking out their palace windows at the same stars, remembering her promise that the stars would connect them across the distance. "I love you," Catherine whispered into the night, her words carrying toward London on the cool evening breeze. "I love you all so much." Back inside, she climbed the narrow staircase to her bedroom, past family photographs and flower arrangements, past reminders of the life she had left and promises of the life she was building. The cottage settled around her with the comfortable sounds of an old house welcoming its new occupant. Catherine changed into comfortable pajamas, brushed her teeth at a sink that belonged entirely to her, and slipped between sheets that her mother had chosen with care. Through the bedroom window, she could see the apple trees in the moonlight, their bare branches holding the promise of spring blossoms and autumn fruit. As she drifted toward sleep, Catherine's last conscious thought was not of loss or regret, but of gratitude. Gratitude for 12 beautiful years as part of a family she would always love. Gratitude for the opportunity to serve people in need, even when that service came at a personal cost. Gratitude for the cottage that would shelter her new beginning, for the children who would always be hers regardless of titles or residences, and for the man who loved her enough to understand why she had made an impossible choice. The stars continued their ancient dance across the Devon sky, connecting a cottage in the countryside to a palace in London, binding together the hearts that distance could never truly separate. And, in Rose Cottage, a woman who had been a princess began her first night of sleep as simply Catherine, a private citizen with work to do and love to give, ready to write the next chapter of a story that was far from over. The country had said goodbye to their princess, but Catherine's real journey was just beginning.